Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. In today's video, I am going to be working on a gouache illustration of my character Momo. And before we begin, I just wanted to make a very exciting announcement that Momo is now officially a plush character. I'm so excited but very nervous about this launch. I've been working on her for a little bit with Makeship. Shout out to Makeship for partnering with me to bring Momo to life. I have never had a product quite like this before, and I would be so honored if some of you wanted to pick her up and take her home with you. I am in love with all the little details. She has a Velcro bat for when she is on duty and when she's off duty, you know, kicking butt, but she's also got other things to do. And even the embroidered name on the back, she's got her cute little patch and her little fingerless gloves. They did such a great job and it feels so soft. So yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with Makeship, this is going to be a very limited edition product. So from today, she will be available for 21 days and then that's it. She will no longer be available again. So we'll have the link in description if you want to check it out, if you want to take Momo home with you. And if you don't, that's totally fair. But yeah, I think she turned out adorable. And without further ado, let's get into the video. So to begin, I decided to use my iPad and use Procreate to digitally sketch out the portrait first. This is a process that I don't always do, but I often divert to if I want to do something that is a little bit more involved. This particular one is just a portrait, so it technically is not that involved in the same way that a drawing with like a full body or backgrounds or multiple characters would be, but like many artists, I find that I do really struggle with hands, so I decided to go ahead and work on this piece digitally first anyways. And so here you can see I'm just using a time-lapse footage here, and the sketching pencil that I used for this is just the default Procreate 6B pencil, sketching pencil brush, I think. And then I just use like a pink or a red color just because it is kind of reminiscent of when I use a red coal erase color pencil when I do my traditional sketching. And so I don't know what it is, old habits die hard, I guess. So I decide that I use the red even digitally, even though it technically doesn't really make a difference. When I'm fairly happy with the sketch, I made a second layer to do like a cleaner line art pass that I did on top. And then after that, I send over the file to my computer to print out so that I can transfer it onto some watercolor paper. So here you can see I am using a light pad to trace my digital sketch onto the watercolor paper, and I just use little bits of masking tape to keep it in place. And yeah, I use a Polychromos Faber-Castell pencil because I find that it doesn't smudge when I go ahead and use water on top. And then I tape this down to a masonite board so that it stays relatively flat while I paint. So here I am picking out all of the colors that I'm going to be using in the piece. And normally when I do a digital sketch, I will do like a color comp, like I'll plan out my color palette as well digitally just to give me an idea of what I'm going to do. But I decided not to do that mainly because I obviously am familiar with this character already. I've painted her and drawn her many times before, so I already knew what her color palette was going to be since I have created this character with a very specific color palette already. So I decided to just go in without any kind of color planning. And yeah, I decided I wanted to go for this slightly warmer hue on the highlights. A lot of the times I default to white, the white of the paper being like kind of the lightest shade on these like lighter skin tones, but I decided to go in with this ivory color first instead. And you can see that throughout the process, I'm going to be adding kind of droplets of water into the ceramic palette here. And I get questions about this every video, but it literally is just tap water in a plastic bottle. I find that way the water is uncontaminated, it stays clean, and it's a nice controlled way to dilute my paints as I paint. And yeah, when I work with gouache, I almost never use the paint straight out of the tube. I almost always dilute it a little bit with water because I find that it just glides across the paper a lot nicer and results in a smoother application, because I find that when you don't dilute the paint at all, it is a touch too thick, and so it creates texture on the paper, which is not what I want. Of course, in diluting the paint with water, it does make it slightly more transparent, and that is fine with me because I find I personally prefer using a glazing technique, which basically is building up the colors and values with thinner, slightly transparent layers, and that way you can kind of have all the colors seamlessly blend together by having the layer underneath sort of peeking through, and that way it just feels overall more cohesive. So there are going to be cases like the background and the shirt later on where I have to do multiple passes, because when you dilute the paint with water, it is a little bit more transparent, and so you do have to do multiple layers even if you are just going for like a solid flat coverage. But again, this is how I manage to keep the paint super flat and avoid any kind of brush texture. And yeah, for the skin tone that I'm painting here, it's actually quite simple. You can see on the palette there, it's that yellowy ivory color, a very light peach, and a pink. That's pretty much the only colors that I use for the majority of the painting process of the skin. And then later on, I introduce a purple. And yeah, the thing that I really love about acrylic gouache over regular gouache is that the color shift from when the paint is wet to dry, it's almost exactly the same. And that makes painting and color mixing a lot easier, because with regular gouache, I find that the color shift is quite significant, which makes painting very confusing. And yeah, the last video that I made, I was painting with regular gouache, and I was really struggling with getting the colors right for the skin tone specifically. And so painting this was a lot easier in the color department. And another thing too, I find is that because it dries permanent, I can really use a lot of blending techniques in the sense of laying down the paint and then using a clean wet brush to just sort of buff out the edges and maneuver the paint that way. Because the thing with regular gouache is I still use that technique and still can do that with it, but you have to be so much more careful because you might disturb the layer underneath. And so with this, I can be less careful, I guess, about my blending and the way that I handle my brush and like the scrubbing of the paint. But of course, the surface of the paper can only handle so much. So I'm not going crazy. I'm not like going in with a toothbrush or anything like that. But yeah, it's interesting because I often would get questions about which one I preferred, if I preferred regular gouache or acrylic gouache, and if I could, illuminate what the main differences are. And now that I have painted with regular gouache and then going to acrylic gouache back to back like this, I am thinking that acrylic gouache might actually be a little bit easier for me to handle in the way that I like to paint, in the way that I approach my painting process. So yeah, I'm definitely still going to continue to use regular gouache, especially for cases when I want to be able to reuse the paint on the palette. That's like the biggest downside I feel like with acrylic gouache, is that once the paint is dry on that palette, you can't use it anymore. And I hate wasting paint. So, which actually kind of brings me to this section here. I decided to use up that ivory paint on the rest of the piece here where I assumed that highlights were going to be. And so it definitely worked out with the hair and the gloves. I really love that kind of warm yellow undertone there. And in the end, I ended up actually covering up that yellow on the shirt because I felt like the yellow just didn't really work with the navy blue that we're going to add onto the shirt. So I end up going for a different kind of highlight color later on, which you'll see. And then, yeah, my character design of Momo is that she actually usually has red lips. And so that's why I originally had painted her lips pink, but then realized partway through, I was like, oh yeah, she normally wears red lipstick. So I find that the red lipstick really helps tie into the other red bits in her character design, like the gloves, the kind of sash tie ribbon thing on her uniform, and then I went ahead and added red to the accessories later on as well. And I have mentioned this before, but I absolutely love painting shiny material, so getting to do that with these gloves was really fun. There's just something very satisfying about creating this like high shine material, and I always want an excuse to paint this kind of material. It's very fun. So yeah, just to backtrack here on this character. So her name is Momo. She is a schoolgirl girl gang boss. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is a character that I originally illustrated back in 2019. And I do have a YouTube video on it, which also was painted with Acryla Gouache. And I go into detail about the painting process there as well, which pretty much hasn't changed from since then and now. But yeah, originally she was just a draw this in your style illustration. I didn't really think much about it. I just wanted to draw and create a cool looking character design that would be fun for other people to create in their own style. And then I don't know, I just really fell in love with this character design, and I just love drawing like sassy characters. So yeah, I just ended up drawing her multiple times, and then eventually I was like, you know what, like I should give her a name and, you know, just make her, you know, like, yeah, an original character, even though I don't really intend to create a story really based around her. I don't intend to make a comic or webtoon or anything like that, but it's just fun to have a character that you go back to and revisit. So that's when Momo was born. And yeah, I actually got the name from a follower on Instagram because when I had posted an illustration of her that I did, it was a sticker sheet design that I posted on Instagram. And then I asked for some name ideas, specifically something that would be Japanese. And so landed on Momo, which means peach in Japanese, which I think is so cute and is kind of perfect because one, it sounds adorable, and two, I feel like the little kind of hair buns on her head are almost like little peaches and her hair is pink. So yeah, I just think it's really cute to have this very cutesy name juxtaposed with this character who is very cute, but she's also very feisty. I mentioned in a video that I have claimed that she is a Aries, so she's got that fire sign, fiery personality. That being said, though, of course, every personality has dimensions to it. And so up until this point, I've mostly illustrated Momo in expressions where she's kind of pissed off looking or she's kind of angry and fierce. So I wanted to this time, you know, lean into something different, and so I decided to go for something a little bit more playful. And yeah, I really love these kind of pouty expressions, whether it be like a sad pout or a angry pout. And so this one is a little bit more teasing, I would say. Obviously, it is definitely up for interpretation for the viewer, but I think that, you know, it's cute. She's maybe teasing somebody, maybe she ate something sour. But yeah, I love drawing portraits where like the hand is sort of incorporated into the piece because it just creates more interest, even though I know I talked about how I have difficulties drawing hands, but it really does add another level of interest and gesture to a portrait. And so I also want to mention that this particular piece that you're seeing me work on here is actually the artwork print for my Patreon page. For my Patreon this month, I decided to have Momo be the theme. And so this is going to be the postcard. And then I also made a companion sticker design of Momo in a really playful expression where she's sticking her tongue out and it's got this little glitter accents, which is super fun. So you do have until May 31st to sign up if you want to get these Momo rewards in the mail. Which, by the way, my Patreon page is a platform where I send out a limited edition postcard print and sticker every month. And then I also provide exclusive videos and just more behind the scenes content. And next month in June is actually going to be my 2nd anniversary on Patreon. So as a way to give back, I actually opened the floor to YouTube video suggestions, and there was a lot of great options on there, which I look forward to tackling. And it makes me so happy to have built a community on Patreon where it seems as though the types of videos that I personally gravitate towards making is the types of videos that they also like to see. So yeah, if you are interested, you don't necessarily have to join the physical rewards tier. I do have a $5 tier reward where you don't get any of the physical mail, but you do get access to everything else. So the video and all of the behind the scenes sketches and other knickknacks. So in the description, I'll have the link for that. But yeah, here you can see I decided to use a very sheer pink for the highlight on the jacket as opposed to the yellow in the way that I did for the rest of the piece. And I think that it was a better choice, even though maybe realistically it doesn't make sense in an actual real life lighting situation. But because there's so much blue on the bottom half of the piece, I felt as though I needed to bring some pink or some kind of warmth into the bottom half to balance it out so that it doesn't feel like too disconnected. And so I find that the very subtle kind of pink highlights help tie it all together. And I admit the painting of the jacket is quite choppy, or it's quite painterly, I should say. Choppy is not quite the right word. It ends up being very painterly in comparison to the rest. I am definitely an artist who tends to try and make everything super blended, super smooth, super clean. And partly due to time and partly due to experimenting, I end up leaving the jacket in what I would consider to be like a kind of unfinished look or unfinished state in my standards. And yeah, I think that is something that I've talked about in previous videos or just to myself, is that I want to try and loosen up with my brush strokes and with my work here and there, because I do find that there is something nice about being able to actually see the brush strokes and the texture of the paint as opposed to it just looking super airbrushed or basically like a digital painting. That's something that I get a lot of from people when they see my gouache stuff specifically, is that they're like, oh, I thought this was digital, which, you know, is a compliment because that means it's really clean and polished, I guess. But I don't know, there's something about knowing or seeing the traditional kind of elements when you actually paint traditionally. So yeah, something that I'm trying to work towards is actually allowing the paint to shine through, I guess. Does that make sense? Anyway, here you can see the very satisfying line art is being put in now, and I really like doing colored line art, and I think that going in with this blue throughout the piece also helped just bring everything together, because like I was saying, with the pink sort of needing to be introduced in the bottom half on the very blue heavy bottom half of the piece, I was feeling that it still needed something else to connect the two. And so bringing in this dark blue line art into the rest of the piece really helped. And yeah, originally I thought that I was going to do some parts of the line art in a pink or like some kind of warm tone, which is why I was sort of skipping around certain things. But in the end, I felt like I wanted it to feel really graphic. So I went ahead and did pretty much all of the line art in this dark blue, and it makes it just very punchy. And yeah, I'm pretty pleased that I decided to go in that direction. And something that I was really glad I had the foresight of was when I did the line art specifically for her nose and her lips, I made sure to have my sketch right next to me so that I could try and replicate what it looked like in the sketch again with the line art, because oftentimes with gouache especially, you lose the sketch that was underneath. And so when you go to do the line art, it ends up being a little bit wonky or just not quite as nice looking as the original sketch. So this time I think I did a better job at kind of preserving the life and the energy and just the precision of the sketch with the final product, which I'm quite happy about. And then the last topic I wanted to talk about while we are painting an original character of mine is the fear that people have sometimes when it comes to having an inconsistent art style, is that when they draw their original characters, they find that because they're inconsistent, that the characters are not staying consistent. Like their original characters are not being recognizable each time. And so, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I am somebody who has come to a place where I'm not overly concerned about having a quote-unquote consistent art style. And so when it comes to original characters and having them be recognizable regardless of your fluctuating art style, is that you need to really focus in on the character's design. And so that way, no matter what art style you're having that day, or if there are slight fluctuations in your drawing, that the character is still recognizable no matter what. And I think that in the case for my character Momo, even from every time I've drawn her, I feel as though it's been a slightly different art style. And, a more extreme version of that is the fact that this plush that I've created with Makeship, it is an extremely different style from what I normally would make in a painting. And people were still able to recognize her because of my character design of her with the outfit, the hair, the accessories. And so that is something that I would say is more important than having a consistent art style when it comes to creating consistency within your character. And yeah, this is the final illustration. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I still don't love the jacket, but for me, if I'm happy with the face, then usually I'm happy with the overall illustration. All right, so that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to everyone who has been hyping up the launch of the Momo plush. I'm so excited that people knew what it was just from the teaser images, and that you guys are excited about Momo and this product. So please do check out the link in my description if you wanna take our little girl home with you. And yeah, thank you so much for all your support, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!